Fable 2, widely regarded as the superior Fable sequel. I've done a video on Fable 3 going into why, even though I did enjoy it when I first played it, and even to this day, I still enjoy it, people don't like it as much, and that video did quite well. In fact, it did far better than a video on my channel has any right to. So I thought, let's do a video about Fable 2. Fable 2 is the reason why a vocal minority of people treat Fable 3 as if it ran into their house, murdered their entire family, took a shit in the air fryer and stole the family dog. Because, simply put, in execution, Fable 2 is the superior experience. And considering that's the older game, that's probably not the way it should be. The games share an awful lot of similarities, as they perhaps should, but Fable 2 has qualities that 3 simply lacks. Is it a perfect game? Hardly. Even if only briefly, it's got James Corden in it.
My situation is unbearable.
But I've got a lot of love for Fable 2, and hopefully this dumb piece of internet content with a terrible title can convey that. In failing that, we can have a laugh, I guess. But anyway, please enjoy this perfectly sane, 110% relevant video on a 15-year-old game, because I simply have nothing better to do. Like Fable 3 after it, Fable 2 begins with a simple choice. Male or female. And then the actual opening from there is perhaps the most Fable thing ever, because a bird poops on your head. Our protagonist is known by the name Sparrow, and we have an older sister named Rose. And we are homeless children living on the streets of Bowerstone. Considering the premise of Fable is that we're going to have power beyond comprehension one day, narratively speaking, it makes sense to begin from a place of complete powerlessness. Our current objective is quite simple. We must follow the Golden Trail, as there's a bit of a commotion going on down the street. Fable 2 immediately smacks us with the cold atmosphere of Bowerstone in what appears to be a particularly freezing winter. There's snow falling from the sky, and we also get a sense for the type of environment we find ourselves in. We're surrounded by criminals, scammers, and one who's trying to pawn off random trinkets claiming they have magical properties.
This is truly a magical mirror. For as long as you look into it, it will make you beautiful.
I'll take it.
Very wise. Now, just remember, the magic only works if you look at it in complete darkness.
However, one apparently actually does. Murgo has come into the possession of a music box that he's willing to sell for 5 gold pieces. Thankfully, there's an old blind woman named Teresa here who's willing to help us out by letting us know that it might indeed be magic. You know Teresa from Fable 3, the progress benchmark? Well, in Fable 2, as it turns out, she had a more hands-on role. She actually physically existed in the mortal realm, and by extension actually has some form of impact on the story being told. She tells us in a cryptic way that the music box is indeed magical, and then fucks off. So our objective is no longer survival, it's obtaining 5 gold pieces so we can buy a music box. So we have to do 5 jobs, each paying 1 gold piece a pop. We can help a guard collect arrest warrants, pose for a photograph, clear out a warehouse of beetles, track down some stolen booze, meet up with this dog, and of course, assist James Corden in finding love. I'm not doing that last one. We get locked into this atmosphere of the impoverished district of Bowerstone that we find ourselves in, and it's quite nice, and the snow, if anything, elevates that and also creates for some nice visuals. Even though the game's from 2008, I can't help but think this part is aesthetically pleasing. And we also start to see the humorous side to the Fable universe. I like that the introduction feels more grounded than Fable 3's, and by that I mean we don't start in a castle. It very quickly escalates to being in one, and then you're very quickly shot out the window. In this setting, the concept of hardship is better understood, and you could certainly make a meta argument about the morality system being more compelling this way, and also starting as a child means the passage of time is going to play some part in the storytelling. Anyway, after doing the jobs and acquiring the gold, we finally get a hold of the music box, and Rose decides to make a wish.
I wish did it go?
Look, I love an anticlimax as much as the next man, but that one right there, after all that hard work, is thoroughly taking the piss. We know what Rose wished for. She wishes to live in a castle, like Castle Fairfax. But since the music box disappeared as soon as the wish was made, we decide to go to sleep. In the night, a couple of guards find us and say that they're here to take us to Castle Fairfax, so maybe the music box wasn't a scam after all. So we're taken to see Lord Lucian in the castle, who, upon discovering that we are heroes, kills Rose and then tries to kill us. Teresa and the dog that's been following us find us, so I guess we're not going to die. And then we get a nice cutscene explaining to us the opening of the game and then the time jump between being a child and looking like a scrawnier version of human Shrek. With Teresa guiding us, this is where we begin our quest to exact revenge on Lucian. It's here where we're released on the actual gameplay, and it's remarkable just how many quality of life differences there are between this and Fable 3. For example, the pause menu is just a pause menu. Whilst I understand the novelty of the Sanctuary in Fable 3, and I don't dislike it, sometimes simple is best. In the end of the day, a pause menu makes more sense in any game really. It gives you all the information that isn't relevant to immediate gameplay on tap. You can't really argue with that. Games very swiftly lose quality when they attempt to fix things that weren't broken in their predecessors. I guess that's one such example for Fable 3. I wouldn't say that's a source of props for Fable 2 necessarily, it's just good that they didn't think to fuck with that yet. As for actual gameplay, the combat isn't massively dissimilar to Fable 3's after it. However, it is far less heavy on the kill cam animations, and at the same time you have to manually collect the experience orbs, which go a little bit deeper than they do in Fable 3. Rather than investing guild seals on a road to rule, there are 4 different types of experience orbs that can be invested into different things. So in order to keep your skill upgrades balanced, you need to balance your playstyle. However, if you don't do that, you'll find that in the upgrades, certain things will be available to you, and those will probably be the helpful things, whereas the things that aren't helpful to you will probably be the things you can't invest in, simply because you haven't picked up enough of the right colour of experience points. It's not massively complex. Often you can invest 2 different types of experience points into one skill, but it's a neat system that at the very least responds a little bit to your playstyle. Because the experience points that drop when you take on an enemy depend on how you engage that enemy. On a fight-by-fight basis, there are also experience boosts depending on how well you handled it. Again, it's not a massively groundbreaking system, but there's just more of an emphasis on giving a shit than there is in Fable 3. You can't actually die in combat in Fable 2 either, but there are at least some consequences. So usually the experience orbs will drop mid-fight and then when you kill the enemy. So if there's a large group of enemies, your best bet is to deal with them all and then suck up all the points manually because you have to grab them manually. If you get knocked out in combat before you get a chance to do that, all of those orbs will be lost. Whereas in Fable 3, if you're knocked out in combat, you just lose your progression to your next guild seal. And considering you can get an entire guild seal out of farting in a random NPC's face, which takes 10 seconds by the way, that's not much of a loss. I gather the experience orbs a bit as I go in Fable 2, so I can't say it's a massive loss in that game for me either. Being able to die in a game with combat is the only way you can really make the combat challenging in any way, but I would say that Fable 2 is a touch more challenging than 3, so at the very least for me, getting knocked out is more frequent in Fable 2, which means it's good to know how to avoid losing experience unnecessarily. There's also a greater variety of enemy archetypes in this game to adapt to keep you on your toes, including monstrous trolls that rock up on several occasions and somehow aren't present in Fable 3. Canonically, by the events of Fable 3, they've been wiped out, but that's just game code for we couldn't be bothered putting them in. Boss fights aren't massively common in Fable 2, but they are refreshing when they rock up, which is rare for me to say about boss fights really. But Fable 3, outside of formalities, doesn't really have bosses as such, just introductions to brutish enemy archetypes and a final fight, but there's no like meter or anything to tell you your progress in that fight. You're just swinging your weapon until they eventually conk out. And then on top of that, what you can actually do in combat outside of your damage output actually depends on how far through progression you are as well. There are certain abilities that you pick up as you progress, rather than just having them and then increasing damage over the course of the main story. So to summarise, while the two games have fundamentally similar combat systems, Fable 2's take is set up to be infinitely more engaging than 3's. It's not perfect, but it does fit. Away from that, the Fable 2 dog is also capable of finding treasure, except in this game the in-game economy doesn't shit itself inside 5 minutes, so that actually has value. But for the time being, as far as story is concerned, Teresa has decided to send us to the centre of Bower Lake, where we find an old hero sanctuary of some description, though this one actually has a physical location. Our objective after awakening our hero powers is to head to Bowerstone, which quickly turns into a detour to deal with some bandits. So that's exactly what we do, taking the leader's head as a trophy. We stick it in our pocket, I guess. Here we receive a choice to free these bandits captives or let this guy keep them for a fee. I chose to kill this guy, take his money and free them anyway. After all, I am what they call an outside-the-box thinker, except in my case the box is almost always on fire. But now we can head to Bowerstone. For some reason the entry to Bowerstone was closed 120 miles away. Upon arrival, Teresa tells us via telepathy that she will not be able to meet with us for another 5 minutes, so we need to go off and do some things. So naturally, I found a blacksmith and started doing the jobs. It's a reliable way to make money fairly quickly. Unlike Fable 3 though, you don't level up your abilities in this role through the skill tree or skill path or whatever you want to call this. You do so by doing the role and earning a fixed amount of gold to do it, which increases exponentially every single time you level up. So the positives are the in-game economy doesn't shit itself in the first 5 minutes. However, the negatives are the in-game economy doesn't shit itself in the first 5 minutes. See, part of the joy of me playing Fable 3, however unintended it was going from baking pies in the humble town of Brightwall to owning literally every property and business in the country. If you play your cards right, you'll have a monopoly on Albion's oxygen before it even gets boring. And though it is arguably terrible game design, it's funny. Fable 2 keeps its economy far more sensible. It takes longer to work your way up to the big bucks, and even then doing a simple job is nowhere near as silly in the amount of gold it actually pays. Also, the quick-time events in Fable 2 are arguably that little bit less predictable that actually provides some element of challenge that makes you feel as if this isn't a cheat code to getting rich quick. It isn't hard, but you're just more likely to stumble on occasion and feel really peeved that you lost your multiplier and have to start from scratch again. Making megabucks isn't at the forefront of this game's story though, so you don't have to worry about that biting you in the rectum later. But with your money you can also invest in property such as shops and houses, though you don't need to find any perks in order to do that first. Regardless, it's a good way to get regular passive income that pays through reliably, and you can also repair rented houses in bulk. There are also sales in shops to look out for to snatch bargains on weaponry and other provisions that you might need, and that, in my opinion, is rather nice. Teresa finally shows up and decides to show us this spooky structure in the distance. As it turns out, Lucian's up to some naughty shit and needs to be stopped. So we need to mooch to Oakfield to find some allies, not to be confused with Oak Vale from Fable 1. But to get there we need to pass through our old haunt, Bowerstone Old Town. However, it's changed since Sparrow was a child. Now it's a respectable district because we gave the warrants to the guard and not a man who can't even spell his own name. And this is something that happens sparingly in Fable 2, but is massively appreciated just the same. Because there are large time jumps at certain points in the story, parts of the world change depending on the decisions you make. So if you made bad decisions as a child, Bowerstone Old Town would be a crime-ridden dump. But because you didn't do that, Bowerstone Old Town is now a respectable, happy district. And Derek the Guard got a promotion. You see, in Fable 2, your morality actually has some consequences, which is nice. Whereas in Fable 3, the morality system is largely superficial, but doesn't run much deeper, nor does it have any actual consequences. So you can massacre people all over Albion, and provided you're a property tycoon, it won't matter, because come the end, when you're king, you can still afford to be a benevolent ruler. Whereas in Fable 2, if you're a bad guy, you will quite literally grow horns. If you make bad or otherwise selfish decisions, it impacts the world around you in minor ways or major ways in Fable 2. However, in Fable 3, the worst that will ever happen is every NPC despawns. Anyway, after facing some bandits and some hobs, we finally arrive in Oakfield. Nothing can stand between me and accomplishing my goal of bringing Lord Lucian to heel. Okay, aside from woodcutting. Woodcutting is another job you can do in Fable 2, and look at the dog, he just patiently watches as I single-handedly deforest all of Albion. This job can get a bit annoying when NPCs begin obstructing your view and throwing you off, but hey, if they want to get axed to death, that's on them, I suppose. This is Roland. He rocks up and sings about you throughout the plot. Anyway, the Abbot of Oakfield wants us to prove that we are strong enough to help him, and that means we need to build up our renown to a certain point, and the best way to do that is, of course, side content. I have big arms. Fable 2 does well to give you natural breakpoints in the story where you can go off and explore the actual open world spaces, because there's side content here that simply enhances the experience. And it has an impact as you generate renown. You become famous almost for helping people, or for being a total tosser, but that's a different story. And the side content also serves to enhance the unhinged factors of the Fable universe and bring them more so to the forefront. A love interest. I have a gift for you. It's the decapitated head of a bandit. What do you mean she liked it? What?
I'm just the luckiest woman in the world.
I don't think side quests are too big of an issue in Fable 3 either. I actually kind of like Fable side quests across the board. They're often charming and entertaining and therefore welcome. But once we have enough renown, we can return to the Abbot. He sends us to meet up with his daughter Hannah, venture into an ancient crypt and do some questionable things with a massive jug. Yes. We also get to fight some Hollow Men, so it's not a totally wasted trip. Returning to the surface, the Abbot is dead. Hannah now chooses to go by Hammer, and then takes off with Teresa. But now we can count the hero of strength among our allies. One of the 3 heroes that we need to face Lucian. The other 2 being the heroes of will and skill. I have a question. How does Roland know where we're going to be before we do? Also, I found a special sock in the woods. I'm not entirely sure if I should use it though. Anyway, our next main objective is to track down the hero of will, Garth. Is that a floating inverted square base pyramid? Anyway, Lucian's boys got here before we did, so sadly we missed the boat on that one. With chemotherapy Darth Maul in town, we never stood a chance.
There was nothing you could do.
What an inconvenient time to make money. We know that Garth has been taken to the spire that Teresa showed us before, so breaking him out is just a game of slipping in unnoticed. But before we get to that, Teresa sends us after Lucian's former butler, Jeeves. For 1,000 gold pieces, he tells us the location of Lucian's journal.
I buried Lucian's diary for safekeeping. This is the map to its location. I would show you where it is myself, but I've got some money to spend.
He's far too cowardly to double-cross you.
Of course there's a troll guarding it, because why wouldn't there be? But with the diary acquired, it's time to return it to Teresa, and thankfully it's runic and encrypted, so she still has a function.
I will translate it for you.
As a result of Teresa's translation of Lucian's diary, we discover he's recruiting guards out of Westcliff through the arena known as the Crucible. Our best bet for getting into the spire then is to be recruited as a guard, and the way to do this is by winning the Crucible. However, before we're even allowed to try, we need to build up our renown. Though, to be fair, Hammer didn't really help in this situation.
Why do you need the strangler part if you're already a mad dog?
Well, it's intimidating, innit?
Seems confusing to me. I mean, I get Irving the Strangler Gibbons. It toughens it up a bit, doesn't it? But it's not like Mad Dog's your given name.
You know, I never thought about it before, but she's got a point.
No, she doesn't. Look, if you really want to compete, go and make a name for yourself so the crowd will actually give a flying...
Luck. That's all you need. A bit of luck, and you'll be famous in no time.
No way I'm letting that friend of yours in, though. She can stay out here and make fun of my name all she likes.
An impressive display, Hammer. You have managed to alienate the very men whose favour we need.
So, as you can imagine, the only thing for it is to do more side quests. The amount of renown you get from a piece of side content increases as you go through the story. So doing a side quest in Westcliff is going to get you more renown than doing one in Oakfield, for example, unless that side quest unlocks later in the story. So there's some attempt to keep how you generate renown on topic almost, as the amount of renown required to meet these checks increases every time you need to do it. I have a wizard hat now, which means I'm unstoppable. The more you go with Fable 2, the more you realise that Fable 3 is just a watered down version of an incredibly similar experience. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why a lot of players prefer 2. It is not even remotely a perfect game, but it benefits from that added layer or layers of attention to detail that Fable 3 simply doesn't have. If you wrote down the rough outline, however, of both games on paper, I wouldn't be able to tell you which is which necessarily. And as you start adding details, from an outside perspective, I'd have guessed that Fable 2 was the sequel and not 3. Until you take into consideration the visuals, Fable 2 being the older game of the two is actually kind of baffling, because this feels like an improved version of Fable 3. It just came before it. My love for Fable 3 stems from the fact that I experienced it first, therefore I went into the game with zero expectations whatsoever, and by that I mean absolutely none, which is nigh on impossible if you're familiar with the franchise going in. So going into playing Fable 2, which I did after I played 3, I know it's backwards. I guess I anticipated a more weathered and less fleshed out version of Fable 3, when the reality is, it's kind of the opposite. This feels like the improved version. And that's kind of the thought process that allows me to still love Fable 3. I feel like I hopped onto the main games at least from rock bottom. Anyway, moving on, once we've picked up enough renown, we can return to Westcliff and fight in the arena. Spanning the course of 8 rounds of intense combat, the Crucible tests your patience when it comes to killing things endlessly. As you go, the intensity of the enemy archetypes that you face ramps up. There are traps you can use, there's gold that you can pick up. If you do the round well, you get bonuses. It's still categorically what I'd refer to as a slog, in the sense that it probably doesn't take up as much time as it feels like it does, but it is still quite enjoyable, because the game's combat is quite straightforward, and yeah, I like it. So you battle your way through beetles, hobs, hollow men, bandits, balverines and a troll, before emerging from the Crucible victorious and likely far wealthier than you were before. And now we've proven our combat prowess, which allows us to infiltrate the tattered spire under the guise of being a guard. This is the first time we see Lucian since the beginning, and oh boy have the years not been kind to this man. This portion of the game isn't long for us, but we're actually in the spire over the course of 10 years in-game time, if that makes sense. As it turns out, the guards here are just as much prisoners as the actual prisoners like Garth. So we meet with the Commandant.
I am the Commandant.
And we very swiftly discover that he has some rather nifty fantasies.
I am going to hit you, and you are going to thank me. Now, thank me. Obey!
This is going to be the longest-winded rescue mission of all time. Over the course of our time here, we get given duties that test our morality, in the sense that we've got to avoid being morally righteous, because we'll be punished for that, and that won't be nice. Such as 3 minutes watching these blokes starve to death. But finally, after a decade in the spire, Garth manages to free himself, and then us, and then we kill the Commandant and finally escape. After reuniting with our no doubt now senile dog, all that remains is to find the last hero, the hero of skill. Turns out it's some pirate fellow named Reaver. Yes, that Reaver. However, to get to his location we'll need to pass through Wraithmarsh, which will be dangerous. So Garth proposes we head to his tower so we can bypass that altogether. Instead we get ganked by an isosceles triangle, and then teleported to the centre of Wraithmarsh anyway. Come on, what was the point? So now we've got to fight our way through some raids. The good news is, they're piss easy to kill, they're just a little bit irritating. We also find our way to actual Oakvale from Fable 1, though it's beyond destroyed now and completely abandoned. But it's a nice opportunity for Teresa to lob some lore at us, so I'm all for it. Though to be fair, it is quite difficult to hear her whilst slicing up hollow men. But after a short journey, we arrive at the delightful hamlet of Bloodstone. It's a wretched hive of scum and villainy, so in other words, it's prime real estate. We head up to Reaver's mansion, and you guessed it, he wants us to prove our worth by gaining renown before he'll even give us the time of day.
That's it. Scoot. Off you go. Vamos. Geweg. Allez-vous-en.
So naturally now's a great time to go off and do side content because you kind of have to. For example, I help out a man named Toby who insists that he can save the town if he sits down and has dinner with a prostitute. This guy is definitely not suspicious in the slightest. We can also go and gather some pirate treasure. It really doesn't take long to amass the renown required to win Reaver over. And we'll probably line our pockets with some delightful gold in the process. And now we've got to do Reaver a favour too. Unlike the other heroes, he's not very morally righteous. He gives us the Dark Seal and tells us to head to a spot within Wraithmarsh. So we do indeed head to the Shadow Court. Basically, we need to sacrifice our youth so Reaver can retain his. That, or we can just give it to this woman here. Basically, Reaver has sacrificed our youth. If you keep a hold of the seal, your eyes will go red and you will look old. Silver lining being, he'll owe us big time for that.
But when the sacrifices stop, we will come for him. This he knows.
Upon returning to Reaver, Bloodstone falls under attack by Lucian's forces, so we quickly flee through Reaver's rear passage. Regrouping with Hammer and Garth, and now we have the three heroes, and can finally take on the Great Shard. And then we return to Hero Hill, where whatever this happens to be is interrupted by Lucian, who steals the other heroes. Tries to shoot us again just like he did when we were a child, except this time, the dog gets in the way. I like to think that he just wanted to die at this point. Unfortunately, the dog's sacrifice was completely in vain because Lucian, as it turns out, has indeed discovered reloading. Dreamlike sequence of kicking chickens, shooting bottles, and beetles later, and we find ourselves back at the Tattered Spire where we must locate and put an end to Lucian. He appears to be up to some that, so of course we then get stuck in and then shoot him and call it a day. Lucian's now eternally Kip, so we've accomplished our mission. Teresa presents herself to offer us a reward. We can choose to restore the lives of all who died during the construction of the spire. However, we could choose to revive our dog instead, or we can just have lots of money. So naturally, I chose the dog. And then the spire does a thing, and then our decision gets scrutinised by the other heroes. And with that done, Teresa then kicks us out of the spire.
The world is yours to enjoy, but the spire is mine. Be gone.
And with that, Fable 2 is finally concluded. Fable 2 is a terrific short RPG with an awful lot of charm. It's still massively enjoyable, even 15 years later. I can see why many players will hail it as superior to Fable 3, but at the same time, I still love Fable 3, even if it is for all the wrong reasons. And even though my entry point to the franchise is still my personal favourite, I cannot dispute that technically speaking Fable 2 is the better game. The gameplay is more in depth, it doesn't try to fix things that aren't broken, there's more emphasis on the morality system which actually has some variation of consequences that matter, and the in-game economy isn't on drugs. With regards to the new Fable in the works at Playground Games, I feel as if Fable 2 has a lot of lessons that can be learnt from. Fable 2 is by no means a perfect game, but it's a perfectly captivating short RPG, and that's all it needs to be. Because, in the end of the day, video games are about having fun, and I find fun to be abundant in the Fable titles. Anyway, thank you all for wasting half an hour of your lives on this pointless bit of internet content. I massively appreciate that sacrifice. If you enjoyed this video, maybe hit the like button, maybe if you want, hit subscribe, share the channel or the video with your friends, comment some mad stuff down in the comment section, I really don't mind. If you like history, maybe check out my history channel Decades via the link in the description. I recently mooched over to Berlin to check out the history behind the Berlin Wall, and it was massively fascinating, and hopefully I turned it into a half-decent video. But if not, no worries, there'll be plenty of content coming this way too. But anyway, until next time, take care and goodbye.